It was 1919, the beginning of Florida land boom. A real estate man named Mr. Moser picks up a hitchhiker on the deserted side of a road. He looked like a boy around 90 pounds, really thin, frail, but he was indeed a man. And little did Mr. Moser knew that the land that he's gonna sell to this tiny man will become the beginning of a legend that will leave people puzzled up to nowadays, because this man, Edward Leedskalny, allegedly knew the secrets of how the Giza pyramids were built, and some say he even knew how to move stones with the wave of a hand. Hello, my friends! So today's story is more of a mystery, no UFOs today, sorry for that, but still I promise stick around, this is gonna be really interesting. So this is the story of a person who allegedly knew the secrets of the pyramids of Giza and also did a lot of building stuff without any technological help. Yeah, and I also chose this story for another reason, because this guy, Edward Leedskalny, who is a huge mystery, he's Latvian. So he's a Latvian who moved to America. So this is kind of also personal to me, because if you didn't know, I am also Latvian. I've been wanting to make this story for a while now, and now I finally did the research. So here it is. Press those likes in advance, because I'm definitely... I promise you will like this. Edward Leedskalny was born in 1887 in a Latvian parish called Stameriena. So he finished only 4 grades at school, although he really loved reading and he spent a lot of time reading books. Not so much is known about his childhood, but what we do know that at the age of 26 he fell in love for real for the first time. And he fell in love with a girl named Hermine Luce. But in many sources, it said that his first love was actually Agnes Scuffs, because that's the story what he was telling to Americans when he moved there. And why is this important? This is important because allegedly this girl is the reason why he did what he did and what he built. So Ed, I'm just gonna call further in the video him Ed. Ed got engaged with his beloved girl. But there is a tragedy. This love doesn't end well because before the wedding, the girl just simply dumps him and leaves him heartbroken, devastated, in pain. So sad. Like, this must be crazy for Ed. Although there is a side note. So as I mentioned, Ed was 26 and his girl was only 16, so 10 years younger. So there is a possibility that the girl just freaked out, like they have 10 years difference. Another important fact about this love story is that Ed usually called his girl Mīļotā 16 gadniece, which in English would be sweet 16. And this will also play an important role in the further story. Because all of the things that he built and that he did further in his life, he dedicated to his sweet 16. So kind of showing that his heart was still broken from the fact that she left him before the marriage. Not much is known afterwards what happened to him, but what is known is that around 1912 he decided to leave his homeland Latvia and illegally emigrate to the North America. Just a side note, so you know, there have been like several waves of Latvians immigrating to the US, and one of the periods was after the Russian Revolution of 1905. And this was the case of Ed, since he was also like participating in this revolution. Ed managed to live in several places before he finally settled in Florida and started to do the things with which he became famous afterwards. So he lived in Canada, also afterwards in several states of the US like Texas, California, Oregon, and Washington. At one point of his life, he started to suffer from some health problems, namely he had tuberculosis. And this is when he decided that he should probably leave the places where the climate is cold and move to somewhere where it's hotter and warmer. And so in 1919, he settles in Florida. As I already mentioned in the intro, Mr. Moser, the real estate man, that was the guy who helped him to find the land for his permanent settlement in Florida. This search for the land was really difficult because Ed knew what he wanted, but he couldn't describe it or didn't want to describe it. All that he knew is that once I see it, then I will understand if it's it. It was kind of a long journey to find the land that Ed would say yes to. In general, Ed was a very ascetic man. He lived an ascetic life, and he didn't have a car. He was riding around with a really old rusty bike. He was riding to the closest grocery shop like 3.5 miles away with this bike. Also, he would use this bike just to ride around and check for the land pieces, because he still hadn't found the land that he would feel like to be the suitable one for him. At the end, people even started to recognize him and started to make jokes about Ed and his rusty bike. As I mentioned, he was riding this bike to see what are the land possibilities around. And of course, the real estate man, Mr. Moser, also helped him, offering like really nice land pieces where he could also do some farming, but he would always refuse that, saying that that's not it. And when somebody asked him, what are you really looking for in the land? He never replied. He just smiled. And then finally, the miracle happened. Ed comes to Mr. Moser saying that he had found the piece of land that he feels like that's the perfect one for him and he would like to buy it. Mr. Moser recalls that he was really puzzled about the choice. I quote, "That was the worst land in the state because it was just bedrock and nothing else there, and it was also remote." The land was finally sold to Ed. And this is where the fun and the mystery start around his lifelong project that will keep the minds of scientists and engineers puzzled for until nowadays, I guess. There have been so many articles, so many books and research is done over the topic of this Ed's lifelong project that I'm gonna reveal to you now. Now, Ed for sure was a little bit like a weirdo, and he liked his secrecy and he didn't like to be bothered. But on this land, he started to do something and he didn't want to show to the others what is he really doing there. And I guess this is why people started to talk. They invented legends and stories about him and the things that he was actually doing on the land that he had bought just recently. And anyways, when somebody approached him and asked him, what is he building there? Or what is he doing there? He just smiled and peacefully replied, "One day, my sweet 16 will come to me and I will show that I have built a castle for her." Ed constructed a large structure that he called Rock Gate. And if we say it in his own words, he dedicated this to the girl who had left him before. But his peace in this piece of land was quite often disturbed because people hated that he is remote and he is building something there. And also, the legends that they have created because they didn't know what he's building there. So the story goes that actually one day he was attacked and beaten up and he understood that he cannot continue like this in that place anymore and he has to move. Now, the story is now becoming more curious. So he decides to move, and his new home settlement would be in Homestead, Florida. This is where he's gonna also live until his dying moment. Yeah. So he decides that all of the creations, all of the huge stones that he has already created in his old house have to move with him. So he has to move huge bricks, huge stones around 10 miles away. Ed didn't have any helpers while he was moving all of these rock structures to the new home. So, well, technically he had one, the truck driver, but he didn't really see anything and he didn't really help. So people saw how Ed was together with this truck driver driving along the Dixie Highway with all of the structures in the truck, but nobody actually saw how he put those structures in the truck. There is actually a legend from the truck driver. Allegedly, he told that he came to visit Ed with his truck, and Ed said, "Just go please around the corner. The truck will be loaded in a minute and then we can drive." So the truck driver goes around the corner. He doesn't look, as Ed said, he should not look. How is it happening? And then he comes back and the truck is already full and they're ready to drive. So the truck driver is in shock because he didn't hear anything. He didn't see any appliances or or technology that could have helped this tiny little man to load those rock structures on the truck. What is more interesting is that Ed preferred to do this moving process during late evenings or even during the night in the lantern light, so that nobody can actually see how and what is he doing. He worked late nights or nights and completely alone, erecting all of the objects. Ed eventually quarried and sculptured more than 1,100 short tons or 997,903 kilograms of oolite limestone into an architectural and engineering landmark that would later be known as the Coral Castle. The largest single stone structure weighs 30 tons, and I assume that could be even larger and heavier than a single piece of a Giza pyramid. I don't know. Yeah, and it is estimated that the weight of the whole structure of the Coral Castle is 3 million pounds. During the process of making this coral castle, he used basic tools. Basically, he was using the stuff that was available for him, like, for example, salvaged timber or old automobile parts. But still, with all of that, without any lifters or technologies, how did he do that all alone? Well, we're gonna get to that, so stay with me. Though Ed was a really private and introvert person, sometimes even referred to as Kermit, at the end he decided that he will open the doors to his coral castle and invite other people to see it. And sometimes he also liked to join them and just tell stories or make an excursion around his coral castle. And I guess maybe that was because he understood that the Sweet 16 is not coming and maybe it's time to show his creations to the world. People who visited were clearly astonished, to an extent that some of them even referred to it as the eighth wonder of the world, because it was clearly an engineering marvel. All of the monolith blocks, they were placed with a very, very accurate precision, and also there was not so much a real binding thing that would keep them together. But the stones are not the only mystery. I mean, the stones and how they were placed there, that was not the only mystery. So on these structures that he made, he also placed some kind of symbols. Some of them were astrological, but some of them were something unique, and we still don't know what was the purpose of it and what's the meaning behind those. The Coral Castle looks somewhat like a temple. I read some sources stating that Ed was in fact a dedicated Freemason or trying to be one. Now, looking at all of the details from a Freemason perspective, all seems to fall into the right place. We can spot pentagrams, possibly an object that can be translated as a Seal of Solomon, all of the astrological symbols, and also a self-made telescope. In one documentary from 1980, a person who remembered Ed recalled him telling that, I quote, "This is because of the stars and the moon." And he would go on and show us his electrical machine with which he made electricity, and he would always divert your question. Yep, you heard it correctly. This guy actually made something that could provide him with electricity, and it's called AC generator. So I Google it because I'm zero in those things, and it means that this thing converts mechanical energy into electrical energy. And remember, Ed got only 4th grade education, but he loved books, so maybe he read somewhere something that inspired him to make this, and he already had a talent for engineering and stuff. And this also kind of helped him to move those objects and do the things that he did. I don't know, but also, judging from what those witnesses said, that he was always trying to kind of divert from the questions, I think he was keeping some kind of secret, or at least pretending that he's keeping a huge secret. But people also remembered Ed as kind and gentle man, although he had this reputation of being a really cranky guy. But some of the acquaintances in the interviews said that that was simply because he had he was very intelligent, very smart, and this is why people couldn't keep up with his thought and thought that, well, he's very arrogant, cranky, and totally different. Now, this story has a lot of romantic sides, but we should probably stick to the facts try to figure out what could be the possibilities of how he moved those stones and how he was simply performing in that coral castle alone, this tiny little man. Now, as I mentioned, people already were spreading legends about how he was building this and how he was managing to do that. So we're going to look in a couple of the most famous theories around this. And we're going to start, I guess, with the craziest ones, if I can tell like that. But again, all of them can also be true. So one of them is that Ed simply managed to unlock and understand the method of harnessing anti-gravity. If this is true, then he really knew how to make those heavy things fly with the wave of hand, possibly. And this honestly sounds too cool to be true, but who knows? Important is also to mention that Ed himself never completely denied any of the speculations and legends created by people. And who knows, maybe some of them inspired him to continue to be so mysterious and take the real secrets with him to grave. Then there is a theory that Ed was playing with magnetism, that he was secretly making some kind of like strange experiments that involved magnetism. In fact, this is the topic that is quite widely discussed. Ed published pamphlets where he addressed the interaction of electricity, magnetism, and the body. All of his theories were validated with simple practical experiments he did. He talked about electromagnetism and based his thesis on the theory that the metal itself is not the magnet and that the real magnets are circulating in the metal. That is, individual north and south pole magnets are particles smaller than atoms, photons, and each particle in the substance was individual magnet by itself. Lidskalnin claimed that all matter was being acted upon by what he called individual magnets. He also claimed that scientists of his time were looking in the wrong place for their understanding of electricity and that they were observing only one half of the whole concept with one-sided tools of measurement. I quote, "Magnets in general are indestructible. For instance, you can burn wood and flesh. You can destroy the body, but you cannot destroy the magnets that hold together the body. They go somewhere else. Iron has more magnets than wood, and every different substance has a different number of magnets that hold the substance together. If I make a battery with copper for positive terminal and beef for negative terminal, I get more magnets out of them than when I use copper for positive terminal and sweet potato for negative terminal. From this you can see that no two things are alike." Oh, and I guess if we're speaking about crazy theories, the craziest that I have read, I guess, is the fact that he was singing to the stones, and this is how he managed to move them. I think this goes back to Latvian traditions. I'm just gonna take a little side note and explain. You see, Latvians originally are hardworking people and also singing people. Like ancient Latvians, whenever they were doing something, they were singing. Whenever they were celebrating something, they were singing. That's like a huge thing in Latvia. We even have this festival where hundreds of choirs come together and sing traditional songs. It's really magical and you have goosebumps and it's really strong. And there are also songs that are called Latvian power songs, which basically are believed to have like some kind of energy encoded in those songs that would help you to achieve or do certain things. And maybe this is where this legend of maybe Ed singing to the stones has started, because maybe those people believe that he knew those power songs that had some kind of energy encoded in them, and this is how he moved the stones. Well, I will leave you with that thought, so now you have learned something new about my culture. Then there is another really interesting theory that concerns the stone itself, that the secret is actually in the stone. So the rocks that he was using are basically fossil corals. They're called oolite limestone. And some people said that there might be some internal forces within those rocks that are made from fossil corals, and that Ed managed to unlock those kind of like energies or those forces. And this is how he managed to like move those stones without any complications. And I mean, if you have seen some scientific videos about corals, they are really mysterious things. So this could be a little bit legit. And also, if we make this thing more romantic, corals do really make their own castles just under the water, right? And lastly, there is this theory that is derived from what he actually told himself, and I quote, "I understand the laws of weight and leverage, and I know the secrets of the people who built the pyramids. The tools he used to quarry the rock are on display there for people to see at the Coral Castle, and several old photos depict the large tripods, pulleys, and winches he used to move the blocks." On November 1951, Ed put on his only suit. He went out and put a sign on his Coral Castle saying, "Going to the hospital." Allegedly, he hopped on a bus and checked himself in the Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. Rumor has it that he suffered a stroke, either before he went to the hospital or when he arrived there. After 28 days, Ed died, and he died from kidney infection at the age of 64. His death certificate noted that his death was a result of, I quote, "uremia, failure of kidneys as a result of the infection and abscess." What this man left behind is a legend and also a memorial that will literally last forever because it's made from stone. In 1984, the property was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in America, and it was added under the name of Rock Gate, but the name on the list was changed to Coral Castle in 2011. Now, there is another surprise thing that happened after his death. So his property was investigated and they found a lot of money. It was $3,500 and in nowadays, I did some calculating, in nowadays it would be like $40,000. So this man was actually rich and he was sitting on his money. All of the income that he had made was basically from the tours that he was doing in the castle. And also he was, remember, very ascetic. And some even claimed that he was basically living on sardines and crackers. So he was kind of like a monk. Ed did not leave any will, so the property would logically go to the closest relative that he had in the US, and it was Harry, his nephew, who lived in Michigan. Unfortunately, Harry was in poor health, so he decided to immediately sell this property. Fast forward, the property now belongs to Coral Castle Incorporated. The main question is, do I really believe that he discovered the secrets of how the pyramids of Giza were built? Yes, or at least he figured out something that is kind of related to that kind of technology. I'm not a fan of levitating stones, but I am not discarding it for the sake of mysticism, if I can say like that. And I mean, nobody has actually seen him moving those stones with like a gesture of a hand, so we cannot really know. Ed was definitely eccentric and very interesting person, a pioneer of his kind. And when I read those parts where it was said that he secretly was doing some experiments with magnetism, I even got some kind of like Tesla vibes. Don't come after me, but that's how I felt. In fact, I have read many forums where people talk about how people like Tesla and also Ed cracked something that could give us free or cheap electricity. However, all of this has been masterfully hidden from us by academia. By the way, Tesla and Ed lived at the same time. And the story about the Sweet 16, here I'm just gonna be honest, what is one of the things that I'm thinking about. This might be true. If it's true, then it's really romantic. Like there are men who are dedicated to one woman up until the moment of their last breath. But then again, I also feel like maybe he invented all of that up and he's basically a marketing genius because this helped to create more, let's say, magic around his creations in the Coral Castle. I don't know. And also I'm just thinking, well, as a woman, I'm curious, about the private life. We all are. How was he living? He was alone. Never in the story I am seeing some other woman, some other man maybe, I don't know. He was completely alone. So physiological things. Did he take some kind of like oath of celibacy or, This is really weird. Was he really like living like a monk? maybe he was, like, considering that he wasn't actually using the money that he was earning, you know? And at the end, Ed Lidskalning's legacy is not only in the Coral Castle, but also in the popular culture. For example, in 1986, Billy Idol wrote a song, Sweet 16, about a runaway girl, which is literally the topic of Ed, and he filmed the video in the Coral Castle. And that's the story about Ed Lidskalning and his mystery. We still don't know anything about him, in fact. We don't know if he really is a mystery. Does he have any kind of like special powers or knowledge? But it really looks like he had, considering the time that he lived and the things that he managed to do. Or maybe he was just like a really good master in creating mystery around him. Now, this is it for today's story. I hope you enjoyed it. I really like to make these like deep dives into personalities of mysterious people. Let me know if you like this kind of thing. For my US subscribers or anyone from US watching me, especially those ones who live in Florida, have you been to Coral Castle? If you have, please share your thoughts and your feelings about being there. I am so curious to know that. And anyways, I hope you have a lovely day, because I certainly had. I always have nice days when I'm recording a video for you. That being said, subscribe if you haven't. It will really help to grow my channel. Thank you very much for those who have already subscribed, who are commenting, who are dedicated to me. I love you all. I read all of your comments, although sometimes I might not be quick in replying, but I read all of them. Anyways, I'll stop talking. Have a lovely day. See you next time.